Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Daze, and you're about to watch Thorin rant for about 3 hours.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Big Brain. I'm all about ideas and sort of having a salon and bringing the great thinkers of our time in. But in lieu of that, I've got these two here to talk about Counter-Strike. No, anyway, everyone gets a joke, right? So I've got Nohte here. He's been on a past one. As I describe him, because it's just my way, he's one of the good ones from HLTV Dog. Yeah, that's actually, unironically, I joke every time because it's, it's a bit true, isn't it? But whatever. He's here. Also, I do enjoy his Twitter. Because if you don't know, you might think, that's weird. Thorin doesn't usually talk about other people's Twitters. What I like about Nohte is he's the guy who just in actually usually quite a polite fashion, just baits all the idiots in esports who work in the industry into digging an even deeper hole when they've already made a mild faux pas or they're slightly off base, or they're just a boomer. Basically, if you want to see his recent works, you're obviously thinking, he's probably thinking of the Astro one. No, go and look at the back and forth between him and the Flying DJ, one of my all-time favourite, one of those people where if you just don't think of him as a real human, if you think of him as a character, this is a sitcom, brilliant character. Love that every time that character's injected into a scene, it's going to make it better. But anyway, there's a brilliant back and forth between them during the major over that whole thing with the coaches and whether they should be allowed to, breathe or something in the same room as the players. So we had a whole thing about that. Now, I had a guest for this one, and obviously he's not here is fucking senior writer or some bullshit HL. What's your actual official title nowadays?
Senior
I know they
writer,
go ham on those ones. Senior editor?
Senior writer, yeah.
Go. Okay. I don't know how he became a senior one. I only fucking heard of him about a year ago or whatever. I didn't really. I heard a few years ago. Whatever. I always have to, keep people as they do. Right. Now, Freya here, people don't know, she also has some, mad official thing. She's an assistant producer at Face It, which doesn't mean, listen, in Hollywood, everyone's got an executive producer, assistant, there's a million of those. Actually, it does legitimately mean she's been Face It for quite a while, and obviously she's worked through their system, done interviewing, hosting. And she also does it more recently for Blast and the DreamHack Opens before that, when they were still a thing. They are still sort of, it's just they've done a weird thing with the terminology and they've changed the name and everything's just IM. Everything's just Carmack or something. He's pulled a Palpatine at the end of the fucking prequels. I'm I am here, so oh yeah, okay, mate, whatever. Right, and here's the thing that's going to shock you all. You're already thinking, this doesn't even make sense, so Thorin. Why are you hosting a podcast on which you've got a HLTV, right? I told you he's one of the good ones. And then why have you got Freya, who's the host? Because here's what people don't know. Freya actually knows Counter-Strike and has followed the game for a long time. When did you first start watching the competitive side, Freya? What year did you pick out, do you think?
2014. Stumbled across the major at Gamescom. So yeah, kind of, I was playing it before then, but didn't really know the competitive scene was so big. And then stumbled across the major in one of the, it was tiny then, right? It must have only been 500 seater capacity. Had to wait to get in there. To see what it was about, and then literally didn't leave for the whole 4 days. It was it was really, really cool, and kind of got hooked from there.
And obviously, even though 2014 to some people will be like, that's not that long, that's ages ago, that's 8 years ago. What are you talking about, guys? And esports, that's a lifetime. So basically, one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode is I've told Freya in the past, actually, and for Flashpoint, it was something I was trying to do a little bit. It's just, as usual, with everything with Flashpoint, it was all mad scuffed, and all the great ideas we had never got executed. So one of them was, I actually think, because she's followed the game for so long, listen, as a host, generally, yeah, you do it by the numbers. You just let all the analysts get all their points off. You're there just to say all the ad read and say all the shit between, and that is a craft in its own. But I think when people have actually followed the game a long time, just as you'll see with Richard on the major, a host who actually follows the game is actually, at times, they're entirely within their own right to give an opinion of their own, to spark discussion or to contrast things. And so she does it a little bit on the desk, but put it this way, she knows way more about the game than you'd think on the desk. For example, if you saw Flashpoint 2 when we had those, they were sort of interview / documentary, maybe a documentary / preview segment about the different teams. There was one about Taco and SK and stuff over the years. She'd done all of those off her own initiative, by the way. She never actually asked us. We never told her to do those. It wasn't a meeting that got together and planned it all. So definitely, she knows the game. But we'll see. And also, let's throw this in there as well. I know this will be the most mind-blowing concept to fans out there, but you don't actually have to have some sort of fucking SAT score of 1600 to be allowed to talk about Counter-Strike. You can actually just follow the game and have opinions. It's one thing we actually do with Britain in sports. I feel like people have missed in the rest of the world. Just call being a fucking guy with an opinion. You're allowed one. You get a beer in one hand, you get literally nothing in the other hand, and you just give any old shite you want out of your mouth, and then as long as someone doesn't punch your head in, you're fine. Keep talking. So that's basically basically the way my shows go. You know, the threshold to get in it that hard, it's just, can you stay in the chat? So here's what we're going to do, Freya. Let's start here. So what I want to do for this episode is, obviously we're talking in a post-Blast Fall Finals landscape about some of the results coming out of that. We've got IEM Winter coming right afterwards. So what I like to generally do is I don't go into the specifics of the matches. I like to talk around teams and then see what people think. And then obviously we can use maybe those 2 points as the anchor points of, like, if you want to talk about someone going into the next tournament. So what we'll do is we'll maybe even pick teams each, and then we'll see where the topics go. So we'll start with the obvious one, because we're going to discuss it at some point in this episode, which is going to be Navi, of course, because they've won another tournament. This time, at least, they lost a couple more maps and they lost Nuke, but even so, like, that's about all that happened, wasn't it? Like, even when they lost Nuke, it was like, wow, finally a third map, and then they just destroyed the third map, so that doesn't even matter. So here's the first question, Freya, right? You've watched the game since 2014, as you said. That means basically that encompasses all the, like, super, like, you know, best team of all time contender, except for like the first NIP team. So you're only missing one, and spoiler, that wouldn't be at the top of most people's lists. Can you give us some thoughts of your perspective? Obviously, one of the things I find tough myself is when you're like right in the moment of someone being the team that wins all the events or they're really dominant, it's too hard to sometimes either be like too stingy to them and be like, we'll have to win 3 more majors to be like, you know, Astralis, or you go too far the other way and you're like, well, they're the best team ever, they can't lose, like no one can ever beat. So where are you at the moment on Navi? I want to get your sense of where's Navi at for you?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think we had this discussion before coming on the desk as well, just like a general one in the green room, talking about when can we define that kind of Navi era, and just looking at the results that they've got and the fashion that they've got them as well. Because I think the interesting thing for me about Navi is looking back at just before the sort of COVID online era hit, we were kind of looking at them as going into the next major. That was going to be it for them. That was going to be their peak. Like they were just on the rise.
Yes.
And then they kind of got fucked by the online era. So I think for me, I'm really glad that we've sort of seen them come through that, obviously make some roster changes with Bit coming in, and come out the other side and look even better than they were sort of post-Academies coming into that online era. And I think for me, the thing that impresses me about them so much is just the fashion that they do it in. And I think Refresh said it kind of perfectly when I did an interview with him. It was after one of the first games when they were still in the booths, in the player booths. He was saying, you know, we feel like we're the only team that can bring it to Navi, but it relies on them making mistakes, which I thought was really interesting, because it was like, you know, they're not actually confident enough in their own game to go up against them and say, you know, we have what it takes to take them down. It's relying on Navi making those mistakes, and you just don't see them do them that often. Like perhaps maybe on that Nuke game against Vitality, but perhaps maybe Vitality had a bit of time because they played them, you know, once or twice before. Sorry, obviously once in Blast and then at Major as well. So maybe they had a bit of time to sort of see what they would expect through that. I think every time they've played Navi this year, even going back to that best of 5 final EPL, they played Nuke against them. So I think they had a pretty good idea. So I think for me, it's just a fashion that Navi are doing this in that is the most impressive. And the fact that you've got Bit coming in here, like the literally relative unknown at this time last year, coming in and they're making that debut for Navi and getting absolutely trashed by Astralis on Inferno as well. Like I remember watching that at Blast and just going, man, this kid has had a baptism by fire, and he's come in and now he's got absolutely ruined. And is he going to be able to bounce back from that? And he did, and he did it in a really good fashion. And speaking to, I think it was Banks I was speaking to about Simple's relationship with Bit and how Simple has been able to sort of integrate him in and get him.
They were implying he sort of
system.
mentors him or something, right?
Exactly. Yeah, which is awesome. Like again, sort of having been in CSGO at least from 2014 and seeing how Simple has evolved, like just as a character as well and as a person.
Sure.
Is really cool, and it's really great to hear that he's just becoming a perfect word kind of mentor for Bit. So in terms of how I'm placing Navi at the moment, because they're not I Am Winter, if I'm correct, right?
No, they aren't.
So I think that's going to be kind of the for me at least a test to see who is the rest, I guess, because it was kind of strange that Vitality were the ones to put up the biggest fight.
Sure.
I don't know whether you agree, no. Like I didn't expect them to be the ones to actually kind of at least go toe-to-toe with them on one of the maps.
Yeah, for me, I actually think Heroic was probably the biggest disappointment of this tournament. Just because out of all of the teams that were competing, you have Astralis with a new roster. You have you obviously had like Vitality coming in as a dead roster, Liquid coming in as a dead roster. So out of all of the teams competing, I think NIP and Heroic were the two teams that should have made it further into this tournament. And with that, Navi having such a clear run to the end without really having any competition, and Vitality being the only team to actually make their run all the way through, I was pretty surprised that we didn't see more competition from the teams that weren't coming in as dead lineups in here, honestly.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, we can obviously address some of those separately. On the Navi topic, I would just say this. Like, I'm kind of with you, Freya, on the point you referenced about refresh and Heroic, because obviously, like, as Nohte said, like, most of us are billing it as like, oh, Heroic's the team that should give them the best fight. You know, the map pool's great. They're a really, like, a well-balanced team, blah, blah, blah. You know, they obviously don't have any roster moves coming up. But I actually have found that what he said there, refresh, is basically what I'm feeling. And so even though I don't know that, like even though it's amazing, all the numbers and the dominance, how they win, I feel like I still need to, like, hold back before I do put them in, like, they're one of the greatest teams ever. Like, I need to see what happens in the next couple of months. But I will say a very positive omen if you want them to be like an era-defining team and be the super dominant and, you know, shadow box them against the best teams ever, is I'm getting the same vibe as Refresh is. It's like, I can find ways that teams, like, should have a chance against them, or maybe it could be a good game, or, like, you know, someone like Ziwu can match one player, for example. But I have to say, if I think of any future tournament, any matchup, there's no reason Navi should lose any of them, which is like, look, if you want a team to be dominant, like, if you can't even think of a reason they should lose, it's a pretty fucking good one right there. Because I would have said this, you might have seen it at the major. I kept trying to be like what I thought was the voice of reason by being like, look, this bit guy isn't really just going to carry every series just like a fucking rookie. He's never done it. This is only his second lad or whatever. It's like, apparently he just is. So eventually you have to start taking all those tick boxes off. Like, at this point, yeah, like, we can shadow box the other teams and go into those as well. But for Navi themselves, like right now, the joke is, they've kind of said it themselves, they almost have to beat themselves. Like, they have to have a bad map, like maybe that nuke game there, or maybe, I don't, listen, the problem at the moment is the team just has so much firepower. I don't even know if they could do a bad veto. Like, every veto looks great to me at the moment because they're good on every map, aren't they? So it's tough to find ways that they should lose, which is obviously, again, if you want great Counter-Strike, like, you got to have good matchups. What about that then? Let's spin it into the topic he brought up there. See, well, we can go both angles. Let's do the Vitality one first, because I'm with you for it. Like, if I had to pick teams, in fact, I'll say this outright. When I did one of my talk shows before this whole tournament began, I actually tried to give people like a little cheeky bet where I told people, since Team Liquid and Vitality were playing each other in the first matchup of the tournament, and both are dead teams, but even worse, the Team Liquid team at least is dead, and it's like, look, they know they're dead, and it's already, people mentally
they confirmed it, right?
Yeah, the Vitality one, technically we don't actually officially know it's dead, but it is, and they have to play 2 more tournaments after this. My thought was, look, if I had to pick between the two, and by the way, knowing French Counter-Strike, where they're all like, they can all be very emotional, very, like, they don't like being backstabbed. I thought, actually, naively, you ready for this, Note? This is a take that aged terribly. I thought, of the 2 dead teams, surely Team Liquid, you know, they could almost just roll out of bed, and with these players, they should at least be able to win this game. And so I was trying to give people like a cheeky tip, like, bet on Team Liquid. And obviously the joke is it was the other way around. It was actually a Vitality that held it together amazingly for a dead team. And at the end of the tournament, if you didn't tell someone this team was dead, you would think it was like a real, fully live team, and you'd even think they're sort of like, wow, they're on the rise, you know, maybe things can get better at the next tournament. Like, as you're saying, like, if they're going to future tournaments where there isn't enough, maybe they can win them. Maybe they actually should be considered a favourite. What do you think of Vitality at the moment, Freya?
I'm just really perplexed as to if they're going to go to the future tournaments, and if they're going to perform this well, like, are they actually going to split? I don't know the details of what has happened with contracts and confirmations and all that sort of stuff. I know just the rumours, and that's kind of it. But that was kind of almost the heartbreaking thing for me, was when, you know, I turned up to the first day when they were facing off against Liquid, and we were doing that at the analyst desk down on the floor, which I actually thought was a really cool thing, because you were sort of in the atmosphere of it, and you could kind of feel how the teams are feeling. Walk past Team Liquid's booth, just nothing. No one was talking to each other, absolute silence. And then go past Vitalities and laughing, joking, like having a really good time, which kind of, I guess, as you said, Duncan, you kind of don't necessarily expect with that kind of roster and the kind of the history of that kind of scene as well. Which took me off guard, like, a lot. So yeah, coming into this, I had the expectation that, you know, that was kind of going to be it. And, you know, they might do the individual. I think that's a point that we brought up on the desk as well for both teams as well. Are we just going to see individuals try to shine? Are we going to see people sort of push teams out the window? Yes. Yeah. And go, I'm a sick player. This is why, you know, a next team should pick me up. Maniac also brought up a good point of going, you know, but if a coach is watching, they're going to want to see you playing as a team.
Sure.
So there's obviously that double-edged, the 2 sides to it. But I was really, I think up until the Astralis game, like, did look a little bit shaky. And then the Astralis game happened, and Masuta just absolutely popped off, which was a real surprise. And a pleasant surprise at that. But then I kind of had to look back and go, okay, are we seeing recency bias of the fact that the only 2 proper LAN games in front of a crowd have been against Navi? Like, is that something that we should be taking into account, that the fact that he's facing up against, or the whole team is facing up against, the best team in the world, like, literally nobody's taken that best of 3 for some time, couple of teams, a handful, have taken a map off of them, but nobody at the major up until that point, nobody else had. So that was kind of, I think, maybe using that as a bit of context to go, okay, maybe they're not performing as badly as you might anticipate in this environment just because they've had their own two matches been against Navi. And then the fact that Zyru as well could actually put up a star performance that is expected of him, but we hadn't seen at the major at that first game in the arena in front of the crowd against Navi. And then sort of resurged back into that Astralis game and subsequently kind of continued on for a couple of maps against Navi in the grand final. That was a pleasant surprise to me. I guess not surprise. I think it's just a good sign because we expect that from Zyru. I think that was kind of my main concern of Vitality coming into it, just going, is the mentality going to be there, right? Like, if you know this, if you know the team is splitting up, how are people going to react to that? Especially some of the younger players as well. Like Kierjan, I'm sure, didn't have the best tournament, hasn't really showed up on LAN that much. Sure. But how is he going to be coping with that pressure as well, right? And then we saw a Masuta interview that Banks did, I think it was in between, it was after they lost to Navi the first time. Coming into the next day, it was going to be against Astralis. I don't know whether they knew at the time, just because of how the games are scheduled. But he looked great. Like, his actual mentality was just like, yeah, I'm lapping this up. Like, I'm excited to play a team that isn't Navi finally in front of a crowd, even though it's in front of a home crowd. And I think Apex did a really good job of putting the expectations of what Masuta would face in terms of the crowd as well. Particularly in Denmark, right? Like, we know a lot of people going there literally just to watch Astralis and to cheer for Astralis. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great to have a crowd that's so vocal. But he seemed very prepared for that, and that was really good. And obviously it paid off just in terms of the results we saw there.
What do you think, Nohte? Where's Vitality at for you?
I mean, I knew before the tournament that they were still practicing, at least, versus Liquid, who were very much just sort of done with everything and had not actually been putting any effort in. I was initially with you before we went into the event, Thorin, where I thought that, maybe some of the personality and sort of conflicts with the team would just lead to issues on the server once Vitality started playing. But once I actually saw them playing and walked up to their area in their first match, and I saw how they were actually like playing off each other and laughing and joking around, then I sort of had more sort of renewed faith that they weren't really just going to phone it in necessarily, and they definitely didn't. One thing I actually meant to touch on was on the nuke topic on the grand final. When I talked to Simple after the match, he just said that, that we just went in with entirely the wrong game plan. Like, he thought that they went in with the wrong game plan, and usually it's Blade who sets those up as to how they're approaching it. And so, he just 100% thought that the way they approached that match as a whole was wrong, and that's why they lost it. But yeah, again, on the Vitality topic, I think that this was just as a resurgence Zywu performance, along with Masuta playing really well in certain matches as well. It's nice to see them not phone it in, even though that they know that this is like their last 2-3 events together as it is. So I'm glad that we at least had a team that came to play without needing to necessarily.
One thing I want to ask you too is this, because I actually think this is a question no one's really asked. It's really weird to me, which is when you look at these teams that have actually given Navi a good game, G2 in the major final, Vitality in this final here. What do you think? I mean, I'm being serious on the Vitality side. How did they do it? Because look, everyone can say like, oh, Zywu was popping up. He was, right? But the problem is his numbers are basically almost like a mirror match for whatever Simples are. So if you see how crazy the firepower is on Navi, these shouldn't in any way be close games. They should be an easy stomp. Like, everyone's actually criticising pretty much everyone else on the other. Like, maybe they say Apex is a good IGL, but aside from that, even he gets criticised for, they don't have enough firepower, blah, 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 all the rest of it. Like, what do you think? How are they doing it? Because how did they get to this final? I thought they even actually sort of, by the end of the major, looked half decent in the game against them. How are they doing it? How do you think Vitality manages it as a team?
I think it's potentially a combination of, particularly in that Navi matchup, the combination of what you were saying, of going in with the wrong game plan. Because we heard from Blade, he said it a couple of times. He's like, we're going to come in with some really new spicy things on Nuke,
yes.
And potentially Simple just didn't really mesh with that, or some of the other guys just didn't really mesh with
Technically, they did have some new stuff because they lost loads of rounds, which they hadn't done for 20 games before. You see what I think? That was actually keep going. Yeah.
I also think just the aggression from particularly Apex as well. I think that aggression from Vitality was like a nice maybe it's the lack of pressure. Like, I think that did play into a factor for Vitality, was just that, Apex could go back to having those kind of aggressive tendencies that we saw him doing, back in the day when he was just an entry fragger, didn't have to worry about in-game leading, had nothing like that. I think at least saw a lot of that coming out, and just playing with a little bit looser as well, which I think when you get that momentum, especially in a team like that, which, has a Zyrathenia popping off, has a Masuta who's looking more comfortable. I think that that kind of comfort that they found and the momentum that they managed to build up, particularly on Nuke, was, I think, maybe perhaps down to some more aggressive plays, and just potentially knowing Navi's tendencies as well on that particular map. And I think it's difficult as well when you're coming off of just the format that we had, obviously, because Vitality played against Astralis and had that hour break, and then going into that Navi game. I think that was why I was even more impressed that they managed to end Navi's nuke streaks. We know they didn't have a day to practice and prepare for this.
They had like half an hour.
Literally, yeah. So they came off of that, had to do interviews and stuff. So literally maybe had half an hour to chill, then came back into it. And perhaps that momentum off of the Astralis game as well, and the confidence that Masuta had coming off of that. Because we saw him kind of continue that on, and then obviously just fell off after going into that third map. That was a kind of how I expected the series to go from the beginning. So it was, I think, a pleasant surprise to see Vitality at least ending that new streak.
I will say as well, by the way, I'll give them complete leeway for that last map, because it was literally the 6th map of Counter-Strike they were playing that day. Like, that's a lot to play in a day, boys. Like, remember, people complain about best of fives. They're just playing essentially more than a best of 5 the whole time. What do you think, Noah? What is the charm of Vitality? Because obviously the point is, look, as far as I know, all that news about them changing to the Astralis players is true, and it's going to happen. And like, they are just going to play this out, and there is no like naive dream of like, let's just do another last dance. If anything, this might have been the last dance, because I think they don't have any pressure on them because they know the team's dead, essentially. So what do you think it is? Because I'll admit, like, when I watched them play in this tournament, it's not that I didn't want them to make the move, because I think obviously that it's a very exciting international roster. It's just they have a charm to them as a team. Like I say, I don't entirely know myself how they do it. Like, it can't just be that Ziwu frags everyone. There's got to be more than that in a team. So what do you think, Note? What are the other elements of Vitality you enjoy or that are good? What helped them succeed here?
I just really like their emotional sort of approach to the game as well. Like, watching Apex play on stage was also just a lot of fun. I think the whole fact that the crowd was against them, and also was very much going out of their way to sort of go against them.
Antagonize them a bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that fired him up a lot more. And so seeing him intentionally trying to pop off on stage a little bit more and sort of get in their faces, I think that also translated a little bit into their game, which is, as you were saying, like, he was being more aggressive, and they were having a lot more. He was having a lot more impact in their T sides, especially. But yeah, I think seeing that element to it, I even saw Zyrathenia start popping off more, and when that started happening, I was like, okay, these guys are starting to really enjoy this moment of being on stage and possibly having that last chance to play together as a unit on a stage. So yeah, I think the whole personality side of them really came through at this event, and I appreciated that a lot.
Zyrathenia was like actually smiling when they were winning rounds as well, because that's something we talked about on the desk, because like you don't see him getting tilted, which is great, but you also don't see him celebrating that often, which is kind of crazy for a player of that caliber and having that superstar ability. He just seems like so chill. But the fact that when Apex was popping off and then doing gestures to the crowd and kind of playing up to that, Zyrathenia was reacting to that too, and his English is a lot better as well. We actually got to do some, not myself, Banks got to do some interviews with him as well, which obviously might confirm those rumors more, that sort of international rosters coming along.
Was that something you were interested when you first heard this news? Because obviously it broke during the major, because it was one of those ones that once they got eliminated, they basically, like, the news just came out on that French website that Mel writes for, right? When I'm sure you must have thought of that yourself, right? If you think of like the Zyrathenia you met way back in the day, years and years ago now, you must have thought to yourself, it can't be that guy, surely, who's going to be in this team. He wouldn't be enjoying speaking English, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember being in the green room with everybody at the PGL major, and everyone's just like, "What? Like, is this actually legit?" And that literally was my first thought. Was like, how on earth is he going to communicate with them? And then that evening, because I think they got knocked out. That was the quarterfinals day. It was the second quarterfinals day, and got knocked out by Navi. And went up to speak to him, and just said, like, hadn't seen him since the major, and was just like, sorry for that. And then had a full-on conversation with him, like perfect English. Still not super. I was like, do you want to do an interview? after this, and he was just like, no, I'm not super confident on doing it, live or
Yeah, of
record
course,
it,
sure.
which is totally fair. But yeah, that really completely 180'd it, and I was like, well, yeah, if this was kind of my biggest issue with just how the team would work, was his communication skills in a non-native language. And yeah, sort of speaking to him there just completely changed my opinion on that, and it's really cool to see him actually doing some interviews now as well.
Yeah, by the way, if you're a fan, there is actually almost no correlation between whether they can actually speak the language fluently and will do an interview with you. There's no fact that you'd think naively, you're speaking to me now, it's perfectly fine, but they'll always be like, no, I actually am very uncomfortable in my English and I can't. And you're just like, well, I don't even speak any other languages, so how are you saying this to me right now? It's like the worst one of this of all time was Starix from Navi back in the day. Because this guy, right, would have a whole 1 hour conversation with me at an after party. Then the next day, if I asked him, right, do you want to do an interview? I'm not even joking, right? He would look me in the face and go, little English. I was like, you just spoke to me last night. I'm like, it's not like I'm a different guy. Like, what are you doing? But obviously he was like putting his professional hat on, like, I'm definitely not doing an interview, Thorin. Like, no. So he's just pretending he didn't know English, which is great. As I said, he's gaslighting me in my own reality, apparently. So, no, the angle I wanted to point out on this one is, one reason I also think that certain players, they're not just even like the best players, they actually are just special. They deserve extra credit outside of the world. Because here's another reason I do think Vitality wins is, when people like Simple and ZywOo drop 30 kills on a map, it isn't like a normal 30 kills because they get impossible kills. They literally just win single rounds for you. Like, there's people, I won't name names, certain CIS ARPers, not called Simple. I think I've given enough of a clue there. There's certain players can rack up a 20 bomb, a 30 bomb, and it'll look great on the scoreboard, but if you will watch the game, it'll be like, they got like a simple kill here, or they backed out and killed 2 exit kills, or they just like killed and saved or whatever. And actually, they're not winning the game for you. They're getting kills, but they're not winning the game. The difference is, people like ZywOo, like you saw in that round, he won that 1v4 to win Nuke. Like, he's just doing impossible shit in the game. Like, this is unfair to be that good. Like, I think that whole topic, like, this is an interesting angle I want to ask you about, because I find it actually, as much as I hate seeing great players be on teams where they can't win, like, basically ZywOo can't really win a LAN at the moment, even if he's the best player, because like teams like Navi exist. As much as that sucks for him, and like obviously people will never treat you fairly, they'll be like, how can he be the best if he's not winning? It's also fucking sick to watch people just sort of, I know it sounds fucked up, but because now that Navi have got such a good team around Simple, I've realised I'm never really going to get to see those like 1v9 games again. I'm never going to see him have to drop 50 just to win an overtime game. So now I'm just switching the filters and I'm just going to enjoy the ZywOo show until he gets a proper team. So if it is this Danish one, cool. But until then, I'm just going to enjoy him trying to put everyone on his back. Because there's something compelling about that. Like, there always will be. It's like the ultimate underdog story in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think once we get this Danish lineup as well, it's going to be, if his form translates into that as well and he keeps this ridiculous level up, it's going to be
game on, right?
Incredibly fun to watch.
Yes.
Especially between this new Astralis roster that actually looked really good at this event. I was pretty impressed watching them play.
Yeah.
And then combining against Navi, there's going to be, right now I feel like the scene is sort of slowed down a little bit in terms of the competition for the top level. If Navi's at an event, there's a very large gap between those teams. Yes. But after this rumored Vitality roster has had more time to practice, and Astralis have gotten a little bit more time as well, I think next year is looking extremely exciting, especially the first 6 to 8 months of the year is going to be a lot of fun to watch some of these new rosters come and try and take that crown away.
My biggest question for the potential like rumored lineup of the Astralis players going to Vitality, not like aside from the players actually integrating into the squad, is the coach. I was really surprised when they announced that Exaz would be departing. Obviously the rumors are that they were coming as a 3 package, and that's it. You take all 3 of them or you don't take any of them, which is fair enough. But I know that he's worked so closely with ZywOo and so closely with the younger Vitality players integrating into it. Not that obviously Zonic is one of the most decorated coaches in the whole of Counter-Strike. But I just wonder stylistically how much that is going to be shifting just from what Zonic's bringing to the table. Just obviously Exaz doesn't do any English interviews. He's not comfortable speaking English, but just from speaking to Maniac, he's knows him quite well. Was just saying that the impact that he had in terms of ZywOo, first developing, first getting into the team, how he was kind of evolving, particularly with Apex as well, like the fact that they work so closely, him and Apex and Exaz work so closely together. I think that's kind of weirdly my biggest question about the rumored roster changes for them, just how that's going to be, and whether ZywOo is now kind of I kind of want to use the term like flown the nest and is, confident in himself and is a comfortable enough player on his own, that doesn't matter for him anymore. So yeah, I think that's kind of, I'm very excited, but I'm also kind of not nervous, but just kind of anticipating how exactly that's going to work. And I really don't want to see that affect anything I was doing, but I'm sure, he's been playing professionally for a while now, for what, three years since you joined Vitality?
I think that's a good point, though, because he has been playing for 3 years, but he's only been playing with Xtaz and on this, like at a top level, obviously. He's only been playing on this lineup with Xtaz. So being able to see whether he can, whether this changes anything internally for him and for how he gels with this lineup is going to be interesting. I think that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, I would say that's actually the interesting part about that lineup. You'll notice almost all discussion, like 99% of it, is just about the players, isn't it? It's like, right, but how would should Mcginis be the Agile or Apex be the Agile? Or how will Dupree fit in? Will he be as good as he was in the... Or should it be Shock? Should it be Masood? It's all like the stuff on that. But I actually think that's the bigger point that looms over it that no one's pointing out is essentially you should actually think of it the other way around. Don't think of it like Dupree and Mcginis joined Vitality. It's actually more like Astralis only has Zonic, Mcginis and Dupree, and they've recruited Ziwu, Masuta, and Apex. Effectively, it should be more like that in the sense that I'm assuming Zonic gets to run the show. Like, if you know in Astralis, they heavily flexed publicly the idea that he was essentially the first, GM as well as actual coach, because he used to be the guy who they officially claimed was the one who benched Carrigan and the one who chose, Mcginis over Config in that famous story years ago where Config apparently in the interview said some stupid shit and then immediately flamed me on Twitter, the same day when they told him not to go on Twitter or whatever. Who knew? Literally just responded to me, he was an occupational hazard. But listen, some players will have to learn eventually. And don't worry, you can thank me for the greatest Astralis lineup of all time. That's right. Me being a dick on Twitter gave you the greatest team of all time. How do you like that? I like them apples, exactly. But here's the thing. If you put it back the other way, I agree. There's no way Zonic's just going to come in and go, yep, as you were, just keep doing what you were doing before. No, he obviously has a vision of what he wants to do. And in fact, I think the area that a lot of people are missing is this. The reason I was really out on the Astralis lineup they have now is because when you looked at their lineup initially, and especially before you knew some of the others were coming in, you heard that Zipnix and gla1ve had signed these long-term deals, you actually start to think, they just not care about winning anymore. They're not trying to make the best lineup. Dude, I get the vibe that actually that's exactly what Zonic and those players are trying to do who left the team. I think they actually, no joke, I think Zonic wants to prove that I can win majors without Device and gla1ve. I can win, they all want to do that because no matter how much people spin the great PR of we're just a team and it was all a team, people want their credit. Everyone wants to get their credit that I really was the best at my role and my job. So I would expect look, I think people like Apex and Masuta, they'll just do what they're told. But the Zero one is an interesting angle because you can't take it for granted he'll just play identically. I know it sounds weird because he essentially does do that in all the Vitality lineups. It doesn't matter who they change in the team. Somehow he just still frags out and seems to have a good game no matter what. But definitely with coaching change, who knows what the vibe's going to be? I mean, Zonic's never had a player like this. He's a totally different style of player, star. In fact, you could argue in Astralis, they've never tried to build around one star, really. Device was almost it's just his role, really, that made him the star and get all the kills. I don't think they ever really sat down and were right, give him everything. I'll give you an obvious example. One thing I always call for in teams like this, or when you used to have Simple on Navi when it was the bad Navi, is I actually think for these players, you should be greedy. You should literally just sometimes give them a hero AK on a buy instead of everyone buying a Deagle instead. Well, the problem is, in Astralis, you actually had the opposite mentality. They were the team who always bought perfectly and always did the pure save and you always do the double save correctly. That's the opposite mentality. So I'm very interested to see how does Zonic adapt to a totally different talent here. It's not really anything he's used in his career before. That actually segues, though, into a topic I want to ask you guys about, which is I want to get your sense for now that, look, we're not truly back online. Spoiler, even people like ESL and, by the way, Blastfit, etc., they've almost sort of implied that the next year it'll almost be a hybrid circuit. Some finals might be LANs, and obviously they're trying to make big events like Katowice and Cologne LANs and the major, of course. But it sounds to me otherwise the main body of the circuits will still be online and we'll still be in studios and all this jazz, right? So it's not like we're abandoning everything we did in the online era. We're definitely still going to have online play, and that might even help some of the teams that were very good online but not as good offline. But I wanted to get your sense for where are we at with now that LANs have come back. Obviously, we've had this hard litmus test for some of the teams, and some teams, I would say, I wouldn't say it's reasonable to say Gambit failed the litmus test. They still don't come top 4. They just won a LAN, actually. It's just that obviously they weren't the dominant team they were online. Similarly, teams like Heroic, They've done pretty well. I wouldn't say they're onliners, but even so, they're not able to get to the finals. They haven't won the events. One of the things I've found weird is, I have to admit, I don't really know, even as a veteran of the scene, if there's like if I could really put forward the principle of like whether you can tell which player will actually make it. Because on the one hand, it makes perfect sense if someone like Kyojin, Masuta, players who don't have very much LAN experience, if they do badly on LAN, logically I should go, well, they've barely ever played any LANs. But then I look over and like Entropic, who the fuck are these guys? And who were some of the players, like who's Bit? Logically, he should be terrible by the same logic, but he's amazing. So I want to get your sense. Like, has there been actually like a trend? Have you got a sense that generally teams that were good online, they were still sort of good offline? Where are you at on that, Freya? Because obviously people are worried. Do we have to discount all the online results, or can we take some of them into what we consider in LAN play? Where's your head at on that?
I think I'm a bit mixed at the moment, just because I think of what we saw of Gambit. Obviously, they weren't at the full finals. What we saw of Gambit meeting up against Navi at the major, I think everybody expected a better showing from them. Just after their quarterfinal matchup as well, where they looked pretty decent. And then Heroic as well. After the major, I was like, these guys have kind of, for me, stood the test. Obviously not making it to the finals, but making it pretty damn close, considering what 4 of them had never been to a big LAN event. It was just all of the players, their first debut at a major playoffs, which is kind of crazy when you think about Cadian like being at the first ever major and literally never making it to the champion stage, which was pretty nuts. And I was impressed with them there. And then they come to Blast, and it was like it was a real up and down for them. I think that was kind of maybe one of my biggest, one of the biggest surprises of the event, was just kind of how tumultuous it felt for them. Like, particularly that Team Liquid game. I don't know whether you felt like that as well, Note. Like, coming off of that first map and being like, we're going into this, I think Heroic's got this, like 100%.
Oh, for sure.
And then hearing Cadian say in the pre-match interview, he's not underestimating Liquid just because of the players they've got on there, right? They have literally no pressure. Most of them, apart from Grim, are used to being on the big stages, playing in front of a crowd. And it was also more of a surprise because they had the crowd on their side as well. Like, literally everybody in that stadium was cheering for Heroic, obviously being in Denmark, being a Danish team. So I think that was, for me, maybe a bit of a disappointment about Heroic, because I really wanted to push the narrative. Like, if you're a good enough team coming from online to on LAN, you should be able to withstand that. But I feel like there's been a huge mixed bag of results when we're just looking at those teams who have kind of peaked and then kind of fallen off. And I think that's just the other interesting thing about Navi. We saw them dipping almost as soon as we got to those online results. And I can't remember when it was. It must have been maybe this time last year, when Navi was saying, we actually refuse to play in a boot camp because we don't want players to get used to that environment and then have to go back to LAN. Right. Like, they were really hoping that we'd literally go, you play individually, whatever, we're just kind of going to take these results with pinch of salt. Then we're all going to come back together actually in person, on a stage, in an arena, all that sort of stuff. Obviously didn't happen for another year from that point. So I'm glad that they adapted in that sense to actually go into doing some boot camps together and sort of trying to do that. And it obviously worked, particularly with getting bitten. I don't know about I think it's just a real mixed bag at the moment, and maybe we need a little bit more of a sample size.
Fair enough.
Just because of, I think the vitality thing as well is a really big point for me, just looking at them and going, okay, if they'd lost to Navi again, the only 2 matches we would have seen them play on LAN in front of a crowd would have been against Navi. Not losing against Navi, not being in that upper bracket, right? Because they were one of the matches where it wasn't an elimination, like literally one of the only ones in the arena. They just fell down to that lower bracket where they played against Astralis. So in a way, kind of glad that happened, because at least we got to see them playing against another team. So I think just in terms of my own feelings, I would class LAN properly as having a crowd there as well. Just seeing, I think that's just a huge test for some of these newer players that we've seen come through. Obviously, you mentioned Bit there, just absolutely not fazed by it at all. Some of the other players, I think that was kind of a big thing from Heroic, was just seeing some of those guys potentially getting a little bit nervous and letting that kind of affect them as well. I think particularly in that Astralis series, we just saw all of the life get sucked out of them. I don't know how much I can attribute that to being in front of a crowd, but I think we kind of need a few more events of actually having a crowd to kind of see exactly where everybody's standing, because I feel like it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with that. I think a lot of the teams that have played so far, it's hard to get a full judgment on, especially because the earlier stages of this event was obviously played behind closed doors. And so teams, you can notice that they played a little bit more towards their own style and played towards their own game. And then the second we hit the stage, there was definitely like obviously some players get powered up like Apex and Katie and are really playing off the crowd. But then you could see some of the other players not necessarily. I think Kyojin might have struggled a little bit for Vitality's side, but specifically like a lot of the heroic players, when the crowd was going against them, you could see them starting to crumble a little bit and struggle to really maintain that same momentum. And I think, at least for now, with the events that are left, I don't know when we're going to see a crowd again, as far as I know, with some of these tournaments coming up. So I think we might see some small resurgence for some of these teams who have struggled a little bit once we've hit the stage portions of it. But yeah, I would agree with the mixed bag sentiment, because these teams were looking, and it's hard to look at it now just because of how dominant Navi have been in recent months. But if you look at the early stages of this year, like Heroic and Gambit were playing incredibly well. Like they were top 3 teams in the world that looked like they could consistently put in those performances and weren't really gonna crumble at like deep into tournaments. But the second we started hitting LAN CS and hitting arena events, they don't look like they can maintain that same composure. Also, just outside of Blast and IEM Winter, like I don't know if you guys have kept track, but Copenhagen Flames have struggled a little bit online as well once they got back to that. So
they've already basically blown all the goodwill they built up from the major, right? They've lost to nobodies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's another team that is just interesting to keep an eye on outside of this top circuit of teams that are playing in these events.
Just on that note as well, Big, I kind of forgot that they were actually at the full finals as well, because it just seemed like, they didn't even get to play in front of that arena. Oh, well, they did get to play one game in front of that arena.
Yes,
but, it was an absolute blowout game. Yeah. Which was a real shame. I know obviously there's been the roster changes with Santara's Gade. But that was, kind of a disappointment to see them, doing so well in that online period and starting it off. I think it was at DreamHack Leipzig, in the beginning of 2020. Back in January, that was where they won that event, and we sort of started to see that rise at them.
Sure.
And they continued that really well until online. And I was, obviously that DreamHack, not a huge crowd, not the best caliber teams, but considering that they just have that the switch up of Keto and Sirson coming in as well, I was pretty impressed with what I saw from that. And I guess it's just a bit of a shame to not see them continuing that on LAN coming off of that. But then, was a year and a half ago, coming in with slightly tweaked lineup as well. But yeah, kind of a shame to see that they couldn't even, take a map off of Navi. Oh, obviously Navi's a difficult game to come in, but then FaZe as well, like maybe expected them to put up a little bit of a fight to them. A bit of a disappointment to see them kind of falling flat coming back into arenas.
I mean, for me, I hate to see Tabson on Big right now, just because it seems like he's in such a good prime moment of his career, and it's just being wasted right now because there's just not enough firepower on Big to compete against teams like Navi, like FaZe. They just won't be able to overcome them with their tactical approach to the game. It just isn't enough to battle past some of these other teams that are competing at these events for me. So honestly, I would rather see Tabson leave Big and go to another team where he can actually have an impact as a fragging IGL, because I feel like he's being wasted. But also, just one other note on Heroic is that I think they need to have when they brought in Exist, it was never supposed to be a permanent solution to their coaching slot.
They said he was an analyst, he's just standing in, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
He was supposed to only stand in for the major, as far as I know, but they've continued using him since. So on that note, I think they need a coach who's able to stabilize those players emotionally or even hype them up when they're in these crowd environments. And Exist is not that guy.
Yes.
He's just not going to be. So when we reach these sort of events, I want to see them actually bring in somebody who would be able to shine in those moments for them.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I'll maybe segue off that, because that's something I did notice actually about this team is it can't just be the online-offline thing, right? Because if you think logically, right, Heroic actually had some of their dodgiest moments at the major in the phases when you were just on that stage with no fans or in the rooms. It was actually in the two Swiss systems where they would just they didn't 3-0, they weren't a super dominant team. They did have games they just dropped bizarrely. For that, I just assumed personally they were in their own heads. It's they knew they were supposed to win, and then they were just losing games to teams you weren't supposed to lose to. to. But then when they got to that game against G2 that they lost, like, I don't even care that they lost that game. They played a fucking great game of Counter-Strike. It was just a fantastic match. And if you lose in that kind of fashion where it's like Nico's just like the best player in the world for one day, you have to, it's like they say in basketball, you just tip your hat, like, okay, you were better on that day. Like, I wouldn't take any, like, that doesn't mean you're online that you lost that game. That was a fantastic game. But then you come to this LAN, the Blast LAN, and then you have this bizarre scenario where it's like a similar scenario. Like, on one hand, you're super legit when you play against Navi. Like, actually, you take a map off them, you threaten them, you do give all these people who are analysts hope as to, it's the reason why everyone's kind of shadow box. Now that Gambit hasn't looked like they can do it yet, everyone, spoiler, is just secretly hoping it's Heroic who can, because they look like the next best complete team, still some of the online or era storylines you can keep with you, obviously well-rounded, blah, blah, blah. The problem is they didn't even get to play the final and meet Navi again, because then they had this inexplicable, at least until we dive into some of the intangibles, match against Astralis. Like, on paper, that's supposed to be a Heroic win all day long, that matchup. But this is where I want to bring in the angle you brought up about the coach, because I definitely agree, right? Exist isn't the right person to, like, emotionally manage a team, because one, he's Swedish, incredibly so he's just a really quiet guy in that respect, and he's not a guy, by the way, like, he's one of those guys who looks like he has no emotion. In fact, even his playing style, if you remember, he was just a guy who never seemed to get pressured, etc. So unfortunately, if you're not someone who feels pressure, you're not going to do a great job of, like, assuaging some young player's pressure of, like, who's mentally breaking down because he thinks people think he cheats or they hate him because he's not on Astralis or something. And then secondly, that's something that actually, now I think about it, I never thought about it in the games, but that was totally missing, actually. When that team looked like they hit rough spots in the game, particularly that Astralis match, there was nothing to slow it down. Like, there's no timeout was going to fix that for them. They just basically, you could see them just spiral down, especially once they lost that first map in the close fashion. Like, after that, they were just mentally checked out. And that's one thing I want to talk to you about, actually, because that's the one thing I worry about with Heroic. It feels like this would be the team, by the way, if we just had, like IM Cologne, a pure studio line with no audience impact, it was just about play, they could actually be the second or third best team in the world. They look like they're really good. But that particular matchup, that actually shook me a little bit for what going forwards. Because in that particular game, like, I get why the fans would cheering for Astralis, but I'm amazed that, like, Cadian especially, if you remember that weird comment he said before the game, where he said, like, basically it was implied by Machine, like, oh, the crowd will probably be going against you. And he was like, no, I think there'll be lots of, there's lots of Heroic jerseys in the stand. I was just thinking, what are you talking about, dude? Like, this is about to be a bloodbath. So if he really went in with the expectation, like, it's going to be an even affair, we're going to get your crowd. It wasn't. Like, you were basically treated like you were the villains and the away team. And in fact, that game, I think they should actually, if they'd have understood, like, what it's like to be in the trenches, he should have gone with the approach Apex and Vitality did of, like, right, you embrace being the villain. Like, look, everyone literally, by the way, low-key thinks we cheat and or we're not Astralis, and they secretly want Astralis to work. So in that scenario, you've almost got to make it like, there's a famous quote, I forget who said it, there's some like wrestling quote where they say, if you're the heel, the villain, the cheer, like when they cheer against you, that is your cheer. You have to mentally like reprogram the filters and be like, oh, it's awesome. Because you could see, like you were saying earlier, like when someone like Apex, when he wins a round, he's trying to intentionally piss those fans off even more. It's like he wants the hate, he wants them all to boo him. Because in his brain, he knows that means I'm fucking getting to them. Like, I'm actually winning here. But I could tell it was the other way around. Like, I could tell genuinely these Heroic players were actually really hurt. They really wanted that crowd to cheer them when they won rounds and when they were doing well. And when it didn't happen, I mean, this is why it's weird to take these teams that haven't really done it, but they're good enough to be top four, because we've never had this in Counter-Strike. There was never a team that could have been like third best in the world, but had never played any big lands. And now we have to find out if they are that good. So, like, this is the problem when you chuck people in there, because they were clearly unprepared. Like, you've never been in that situation in your life. There is no preparation, right?
Yeah, I think just go back to your comment about Cadian giving that pre-game interview. Like, we just finished a desk segment. For anybody who didn't, see it on the broadcast, we were right at the back of the arena. So as soon as we turn around, the screen is right behind us. He was like, yeah, I think maybe, 40, 50% or something are wearing Heroic jerseys. And I was just like, dude, all I can see is stars, like everywhere. Like, there was no Heroic jerseys in sight. And I think you're totally right. Like, coming in with that mentality of like, we're on home soil, right? Surely this is our best opportunity. And maybe coming off that Liquid game as well, where people were literally booing Liquid too, just because, Danish team, oh, we'll go with them, right? Not anything against the crowd for doing that. It's just, what you would do in terms of a home audience. So I think you're totally right. The kind of mentality that he came in with. And I think also this didn't happen in that particular game, but he had quite a cold start just to the entire tournament, which I was kind of surprised in. And then we saw that Liquid game where it sort of started cold a little bit more and then went into that third map, and you could sort of see the camera shots of him being like, yeah, big brain, like that was my huge play. And maybe coming off the confidence of that, to come in to a game where you think, maybe the audience are going to be 50-50 on you, and then just get absolutely shat on with that. I don't blame them for going into the second map there of it was Mirage first, right, and then it went to Nuke.
Yes.
And coming into Nuke and just going, actually, yeah, I'm just mentally deflated as well, which is kind of obviously you can't do as a team, but I could see exactly why that happened, kind of for all the reasons that you guys were saying too.
I think for me, he also just set himself up for a massive fall after going into that Astralis match. Like in my interview with him, he said that whoever was the winner of this match against Astralis, like it was a massive hyperbole.
I know, exactly.
No way he did this comment. But he said that whoever would win this match between them and Astralis would have bragging rights for months, maybe years. And like to a degree, yes, I get it, because when's the next time you'll play in front of a Danish crowd, like first big crowd LAN in 2 years, basically, like outside of Stockholm. But it's just, that is such a ridiculously hyperbolic comment to make when there's no way that the bragging rights are going to last for years. And also, you're playing against a brand new roster who's coming in with 11 days of practice. And yes, it's a domestic matchup, but like how much stock are you putting in this team that's practiced for 11 days when you're a roster that was like numbered like in the top 3 in the world for the first half of the year, essentially? There's no way that you should be coming in and putting that much faith in them like that. You should just be thinking that, oh, this is going to be a blowout for us. We're going to take it. But when you put that much faith into Astralis, like being able to put up a performance against you, then you're already in your own head before the match has even started. And that's the impression I got from them.
Dude, here's the thing. I don't know if you've noticed this, but like Cadian is very much in the vein of, I'll give you a classic example of Taz from Virtus.pro, which is, I've known both these guys behind the scenes as well. What they do is this, right? What they get off on is like the epicness of the moment. Like famously, these are players who play to the camera and they're great in interviews, and obviously they're brilliant on stage with the quotables and stuff. And part of what they almost do is, the joke I always make is, it's like they think that they think that they're watching the biopic of their life, but in real time, and that they're just getting to like direct it while they're in it. Like they're not just living their life, they're living the movie version of what their life's going to be. So as a result, anytime there's a moment like this that they can try and make it like some epic moment, they lean into it super hard. But I agree with you, that was definitely not the vibe to do for this match, because in this match, all you had, by the way, was some kind of loss coming your way. Like, let's say you'd actually just dominated like you should have, then everyone would have just said, oh, well, who cares anyway, that doesn't count for the rivalry because it's a brand new lineup and they've never played together, and so therefore, so you never actually would have had a big win, by the way, but instead you have like quadrupled the pressure on you by saying that comment that like as you said, it wasn't even that they'd been bragging right for months. He said maybe years. Like, first of all, miss me with the years part. No one in 3 years is going, yeah, but what about that time I beat you in the lower bracket of Blast 4? Nobody, that's already ridiculous, right? And then there's the other angle, which is, listen, I will say, because I did that meme on Twitter where I took the 2 headlines. I took your headline where he said that, and then I took the headline of the quote he did after that loss, where he goes, the Danish throne can't be decided by one match.
I was actually just trying to find that quote.
It makes him look like a total asshole, because it makes it look like he's going, wait, it's starting now. No, wait, it's starting now. But he wasn't actually. Like, I will say, if you read the 2 interviews, as you pointed out, in his first one, he is also more talking about the idea of, like, it's an epic game, obviously Danish crowd and stuff. And I know for the one afterwards, he didn't just say what the headline said. I think the implication he had for that was like, it should be like a best of 3, a best of 3s or something, like some sort of jazz, which, by the way, does sound like, best of 3, like after you lose, like that's like the shit where your little brother doesn't actually want to accept the loss in a fucking game of rock, paper, scissors or something, Cadian. But that's also, I do think, what he made a mistake with there, because he was trying to make it almost like, it's like he thought that if he built up the stakes, then when you win, you get to cash all that out and it will be true. Like, it would be such an amazing. But as I say, like, if anything, I think you should have gone the other one on that one and be like, look, guys, we can't possibly know how good they are. Maybe they're a mate. Who knows? We just play the game. You play it out, I keep saying, play it like you're supposed to be here. Like, you're just a professional. It's another day in the office. It is just a fucking low bracket match as well. It wasn't like the grand final, Katie. Like, what bracket rights do you ever get for like a random low bracket semi-final? Like, that whole narrative was just whack. And as you saw, by the way, backfired in his face pretty hard if you see the way that game ended. I wanted to ask you about that then, since you were both at the event. I wasn't there, I could only watch it on camera, right? I will say, Blast obviously does a mega job with the crowd mix. You can generally hear if the crowd is cheering or not cheering, as was, I thought, a bit notorious in the upper bracket final. Like it was almost like a bunch of bored people just waiting for the next match to start. But this is what I want to ask you. That vibe, especially obviously in the second map of the Heroic Astralis series, where Heroic was just getting destroyed completely, and obviously they went out of the tournament in this match. Give me some sense, what was that like? Because that must have felt for the Heroic players like the loneliest fucking location in the entire world. That looked really brutal. I've never seen in a long time one team just almost get destroyed by the moment like that. What do you think, Freya?
Yeah, I think to echo that as well, the arena setup, I was literally having a chat with somebody about this today. Just the actual physicality of the arena means that you can hear somebody cheer from, over here and you're over the other side of the stadium.
Right.
But also means that silence just almost is deafening in that sense, because there's just like nothing. They were giving absolutely nothing to Heroic after any round they won. Which obviously, as we were kind of prefacing, I think they were surprised at as well.
Yes.
But I think just in terms of the, what were they calling it? Like the super fan area as well, where it was like, they had this, the triangular stage and they had the little triangle in the middle where the super
At the front, they had sort of, I think, like 50 hardcore fans for each team or something like that.
It was a really
they'd
cool
rotate them in and out.
I'll give them that. Like, it was really, really well done.
It was really well done, and I think that really added to the atmosphere and the noise. But for that particular match, they really had to scrape to find any Heroic fans that were willing to cheer for them. Like normally they'd kind of do it 50. Well, it kind of became a bit difficult to do that with Astralis getting so high up, but normally they do it kind of 50-50 split of Heroic fans this side, Astralis fans this side. But like there just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough people cheering for Heroic. There was a couple of people by the where the analyst desk was kind of elevated onto the sort of the top tier of seating. And you probably saw it on the cameras.
On camera, they had a little area, it looked like there was Heroic fans. I guess that was the one shot they could get in the whole building, though. Right?
Literally, and there was like 8 people there, and they were absolutely wasted as well. So it's like you just kind of find that Heroic flag, just sort of pick it up and go, yeah, fuck it, we'll go with this.
Okay.
But yeah, that was literally it. That was kind of the only so at the analysis it kind of sounded like something was going on, but I kind of went and watched some of the games in the stadium as well, just for the atmosphere. And yeah, it was. I couldn't believe how shifted it was towards the trials. Like I thought it would be heavily favouring them, but the fact that literally Heroic would win a round and there was nothing. It was a similar thing with the Astralis Vitality game, right? But at least Apex was playing up to it, and then people were booing, so there would be that kind of some kind of atmosphere, right? Even if you're battling against somebody. But yeah, if you win a round and there's literally nothing going on, that must suck as a player. Like that must suck more than being rude.
If someone's just a fan and they haven't watched many tournaments, or maybe they only joined us in the online era, so they're just not aware how LANs work. It's not that like the fans always cheer equally, but what tends to happen is they do tend to still just like at a very minimum just politely cheer any big moment, right? So the logic goes like this: if you are even the underdog or a foreign team, it's yes, you're not going to start with the crowd behind you, and obviously initially they're going to try their hardest to sort of like make the home team win. But the idea is you can actually sometimes turn a crowd to your side as well. Like if they start playing like the home team sucks and you're just wrecking them. First of all, if you have someone who's a superstar like Azimu, people will cheer just for him anyway because he's a superstar player. And then the idea is if you just like if you kind of like win them over, you can turn the crowd. Listen, even if Heroic had started winning this game, there was no way they were turning this crowd back. Because as you say, even on the map, the Mirage that they were doing well on, like even when they would make an epic play, it was like you could hear a pin drop, couldn't you? It's just nothing.
Yeah, it was. That's why Cadian's comment about the crowd being, or part of the crowd being with him, was so weird, because I was walking around the arena just to get a sense of like the different areas and its sections, and I think I probably saw maybe 2 Heroic jerseys that I actually like visually saw myself. That is, almost everyone's there in an Astralis jersey, and when the crowd was yelling, I would say it was like 95% Astralis cheers throughout the whole match. So it was just like having, especially for Cadian and Heroic, coming in and playing a game on home soil and thinking that they might have Danish fans on their side, and it's going to be like, oh, they're going to have people yelling with them the whole time. That, I can only imagine that gets into your head way more than going, I don't know, to Stockholm and having people not cheer for you, right? Like that's got to be way more taxing on your mental side of the game than any other arena not cheering you on or booing you.
I think the walkouts as well probably made it even more difficult, because like you're coming up off of this sort of this elevated platform and you're slowly appearing to the crowd, and then just to be received with nothing, like that must really suck. And you've got to do the walk all the way down to the bottom.
Oh right, they didn't even get any pop off that either.
They did. I think they got a pop off on the
Yeah.
risers, but for example, like so when the stage lights start going off, so everything dims in the arena, and then the background sort of plays, and there's spotlights on the players, and as they're coming up, there's like music playing and whatnot. So there's a little bit of crowd cheering as the players get spotlit at the top and they walk down. But for example, for Heroic, the cheering was mostly happening once the players had already like risen up and then they started walking or whatever. Whereas for Astralis, the second the lights went black, it's a roar. There's a roar before anything's even happening. Right. The spotlights are on, the crowd gets even louder, and it just peaks and it just keeps going up the whole time. So at least like for me, that was like the scale difference.
Yeah, that must be really hard to. I think they came out first in the Astralis game, but yeah, to be received with that, and then Astralis coming out, just being like, damn, like I can't hear a thing now that Astralis are coming out for at least a minute. It must be kind of disheartening, if you're a player and this is your home soil as well, right?
What I want to ask you guys is this before we move to another team is on the Heroic side, as I said, they are a team that it almost tortures me when I'm trying to think analytically about them because there's so many things I like. Like I actually find them even one of the most entertaining teams to watch. I really enjoy watching them play because they've got such a great distribution of all the fragging. They play tactically. They clearly make like prepared rounds, but then they also do mid-round reads. Like tons of the players can win clutches. Like there's a million reasons I could give people to watch them. But like I pointed out before, if I look at these last couple of tournaments, they actually haven't gone quite as far as I thought they would have, or they could have done more. Or it feels like they're not somehow tapping into that fifth gear, as it were. So, what's your take on this, Freya? Like, does Heroic, do they kick in the gear next tournament? Do you see them? Do they get overtaken by others? Where do you think Heroic goes from here?
I mean, I hope that they can go back to what you were saying, because I think for me, the pleasant thing about seeing them, coming into the sort of, I guess, like LAN light atmosphere where, there's no crowd, they are on LAN. It was good to see them continuing that, the kind of style that they famed themselves for online with, Cadian being aggressive, not afraid to sort of bring out double AWPs, like all those sort of nice little things that they were kind of known for. I felt like they did transfer some of that across to LAN. So I think I don't really know what the key is. I think just at the full finals, it was just a bit of a disappointment to see Cadian not being up to his usual self, just in terms of what he was putting into the server early on in the tournament.
Yes.
But I know he's feeling, it's not an excuse, but I know he's feeling a bit under the weather. You didn't see him having that kind of same hype and energy in some of the earlier games. Obviously, that Team Liquid game absolutely blew that out the window. I also wonder, the question of stamina does come up, because they had to play that Liquid game, and they did have a game break, so it was different to the Vitality on
That's
the final
true.
day.
There was a match in between.
Yes, yeah, and then they went on to Astralis, which again, you don't. When we're talking about the tactical side and the preparation side for Heroic, I'm sure they're not like how big were, where it was like we're literally going to anti-strat for everybody.
Sure.
But you don't. There wasn't that much tape at that point of this new Astralis to go off of, right? No. So I think that was potentially something that caught them off guard, and I know that's not like a. It's not like a trend that we've seen because it's just been so different opponents for them, right? But I think I do want to give them a little bit of maybe benefit of the doubt for that coming into a difficult situation in terms of that format, in terms of some players who aren't used to playing in front of the crowd and aren't used to doing those kind of long stints of days in an arena where you're not comfortable in your home environment. I think potentially, I don't know, maybe just because I like watching them as a team and their kind of play style, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I hope that they can kind of refine that form coming into early. Again, I don't know when the next tournament that's actually going to have a crowd is, but going into 2022, I hope that this has kind of taught them the lessons that maybe they need to learn from being in that LAN environment, right? Like those younger players who I don't think we saw a huge drop off in form. It wasn't like we were coming in and seeing, them absolutely just bombing out and not being in the zone. But I do think it was tough for them in that particular situation, going up against a team that you just don't really know that much about, right? There's not much tape on them, and it being in the same day, so you don't really even have time to compartmentalize that, to sort of build some strats. I don't know about but I think there's kind of a little part of me that thinks that was a big reason in terms of their particular full finals.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to justify, honestly, because as you said, like Cadian was feeling very under the weather. I talked to him a couple of times, and that obviously that is a couple of players were actually from other teams as well.
Did they say it in interviews publicly, or was it just privately? I never really saw this as like a storyline. I
think some players mentioned it, or at least it was touched on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that Blame F said it, but KD and himself, did he actually say it in your interview with him or anything?
I don't think he's. Yeah, I don't think he said it in my interview with him, at least.
Fair
But
enough.
he definitely was like, even if you saw on some of the player cams, like he was coughing occasionally.
So
Right.
I asked to speak to him, and the answer was no. He's feeling under the weather. That's where I knew it from.
Fair
was-
enough.
Yeah,
couldn't
I
do
got
an
that
interview
for
with
3
him,
days,
yeah.
basically,
Okay,
when I was
got
trying
you,
to talk to him. So, for sure. But there was also a couple of other players that were feeling under the weather. Obviously, like, everybody was COVID tested, so it wasn't that. But, like,
Yeah.
it was more that, like, it was a general trend. So, I don't know. I think for Heroic, it's not necessarily that I'm not afraid for them as a lineup, in the sense that I think that they definitely still can showcase that they can play well at a top level. Again, I think for me, they once we reach crowds again, they need some form of a coaching change to be able to bring the players up, because without that, I don't think they can really move past where they are at the moment. Yes, this tournament specifically, they had the sort of test of fortitude where they had to play matches back to back, or I guess spaced out on the same day. But even then, I think even once we reach another crowd or a crowd environment, I don't think that we see them overcome. Like, we might see them get to the grand final, but I don't think that they overcome a team like Navi or Astralis if they've got more practice or a new vitality. I think that the tenure of those players in stage environments for some of them is just gonna be able to overcome the sort of inexperience of Heroic, because right now they've really only had 2 main stage showings to be able to work off of. I do think IEM Winter will see them play better, just because it's going to be behind closed doors the whole time. So I think that will give us a sense more of where they stand as a team without any of the outside influence of a crowd.
And the fact that Navi aren't there as well, I think
Yes,
that's
of course.
like actually
Sure.
the biggest interest for me in terms of, obviously it's not going to cement who's at the top, whatever. I think we have to take it within that context of, okay, who are the other teams? Where should we be placing these teams without the sort of chaos of throwing a Navi match in there and going, oh, well, we know they're going to lose out. Oh, they've gone down to the lower bracket. Might be an upset match there, whatever. So it might, I guess, create a bit more, weirdly a bit more stability in terms of some of the results. I don't know. We've got another other teams coming in that we haven't really seen. But I'm just interested to see it in that context on its own.
No, I think, by the way, you make a very valid point, because as you say about stability, the real problem is like when you meet Navi in the tournament, especially if you've got like a single Olymp playoffs, that just determines when you lose, doesn't it, at the moment? Like, realistically, we can't know. If you meet them in the quarterfinals, you might actually be the second best team, but you bad luck. The bracket screwed you, so I'm with you on that one. And also, I have noticed that is a key thing you need, because obviously in the old circuit of LANs, we had so many LANs. There'd always be a LAN where, like, say, Astralis, or wherever the number one team is, doesn't go. But you'll notice, this is why it's a good test. That doesn't always mean that the second best team wins, as Team Liquid 2018 showed you. If everyone remembers that ESL New York tournament where all the other good teams were there, but Astralis went to that blast, I think it was the Istanbul one, actually, right? And because on paper there was no Astralis, it was like, right, Team Liquid, no problem, guys. Now you guys can finally get that win. And they still managed to find a way to lose to Mouse Sports in that final, with Chris J doing that fucking mad round on Mirage in the 5th game. So what it showed you was, like, it's not that it shows you that Team Liquid wasn't the second best. It just showed them they clearly had some problems in finals. It wasn't just about facing Astralis. So yeah, I would be very interested to see that in itself. I think it's even a good angle for Heroic for this next tournament. It's like, look, if there's no Navi, now what excuse is there? You've had a couple of LANs, you've had your moments that were good, bad, there's no crowd against you this time. On paper, you're just supposed to go and win the tournament. Like, then we don't have to hype you up as the second best. Just go and win the tournament with no Navi, and it naturally will make the storyline come along. Right, so one thing, I want to transition to the obvious other team to talk about from the Blast 4 finals, because they just were the ones that eliminated Heroic, and it has to be Astralis. Because coming in, I'll put all my cards on the table. In fact, luckily, because I do all this work, it's already on bloody YouTube. I can't delete it at this point in time. I could, but what the fucking point be? I've been wrong a million times. So in almost as notorious fashion as that time, I did actually pick incorrectly the winner of all 7 playoff matchups at E-League Season 2, therefore going 0-7, which did spawn that amazing meme where someone did like the James Bond, but it was just me as the 0-7 or whatever. That was like, that was the meme. But sometimes the internet has a good meme. Basically, I did did come into the match when Astralis was playing, and I gave all these reasons as to why there's no way this Astralis would be good. Not like I was like, BlameF's never even not even been in IGL before. Obviously, Config had a broken wrist. He might even be good anymore. Who knows? Like Zipnix just wanted to bag gla1ve. He hasn't even played with players like this. It's a different type of team. And Ave, he's just a cheater and he has to adapt to CSGO. And then of course they just looked amazing in like those first couple of games. So that's all out the window apparently. But that's the question. That's why I want to start now. Is it all out the window? Like, did this performance, has this like made you, are you like a true believer in this Astralis team now? Is the potential all there? Are you all in on them? Are you going all in?
I actually thought they were very promising this tournament, especially considering talking to blamef before they even started their tournament runs. He said that they had 11 days of practice coming into it. And I think for a team like Astralis, who were previously very tactical, and blamef himself, who does a lot of the legwork and does a lot of the research, I think this team has so much potential to get even better as they go. So seeing them perform like this at an event where they haven't had that much time to actually get their own strategies sort of implemented and really fleshed out, I think that showed a lot of promise. I think gla1ve even said in a stage interview before one of their matches that he felt that they were individually playing very well this tournament, but tactically they could have a lot more depth.
Oh, yes.
And I actually 100% believe that, because you could see in some situations in the game that they had rounds where they just didn't have the adaptations and the, a lot of stuff that would be pre-planned reactions to certain situations that Astralis were very good at sort of reading into previously. You could tell that those were sort of being called on the fly, or were being sort of still a little bit shaky in terms of how quickly they were reacting to it. And that's just because they are a relatively new lineup in terms of the 5-man players. So I think this gave us a very early indicator of the potential for the team, just because you saw how well Config was playing, and that whole storyline that people had of whether he can come in and recover from his injury coming into this event.
That one seems pretty conclusively proven.
Yeah, he disproved every single person with this immediately off the bat. I think he had some absurd 30 kill performance in his first map, and then another 30 kills or close to it in the second. So he disproved that. I think for me, what's the reason I'm so in on this team is that gla1ve, towards at least the end of the last Astralis lineup, when he stepped back from in-game leading a little bit as well, a lot of the work going into matches was put on him and Zonic in terms of the preparation and the sort of demo work and whatnot. And blamef even told me in the interviews that he is trying to sort of fill that gap so that gla1ve, and take some of the pressure off of gla1ve's shoulders. So a lot of the demo work is gla1ve is obviously still doing it, and blamef is trying not to sort of overlap and get in the way of that. But what he is doing is, when they're going into a practice, blamef is basically giving him a Google Doc, or giving him a bunch of ideas and he's basically saying, take it if you want to, don't take it if you want to. Here are all of these ideas that I have seen or I can bring to the table, and it just gives them a deeper playbook over time. I think they haven't necessarily implemented it yet, but having somebody else to be able to do a lot of that legwork, and someone like blamef who watches a lot of the demos, I think that just adds so much to this lineup that already had a lot of tactical depth in previous iterations. So I think going forward, this team will be a pretty serious competitor next year.
I really like to hear that as well. I was really, I think obviously there was a lot of things to be skeptical about for this new Astralis lineup, but one of the biggest things for me was, is blamef going to want to relinquish that control that we know he had in complexity, right? Is he going to be coming in, and is gla1ve going to be going, actually, you know what, I enjoyed that time where I wasn't being a game leader, you can take it on. How is that going to be working? But that's actually really cool to hear that thus far it sounds like they found something that works for the both of them. Obviously, I hope that continues in the future as well. And that actually makes a lot of sense in terms of why Mirage is now integrated into that pool, right? I was really excited to see that, and it makes total sense with blamef and config. I think for me, they're kind of the two recently most synonymous players with that map, right? Just config, it doesn't matter whether he's T-side, CT-side, just super aggro down mid. And that was kind of something I was maybe a bit worried about coming onto Astralis, going, is he going to get to play that map anymore? So it's good to hear that. And I think they're just embracing of both sides seems to be working quite well. And I like that you brought up the gla1ve point as well, because I think a point that we were making on the desk is that he's super self-aware as a player. And we literally done this whole 15, 20-minute segment, and then he did that interview on stage, which was like, yeah, that's exactly what we were saying. Is there going to be that tactical depth going forward? Is that something that they're aware of and are kind of working towards getting back to that notorious Astralis level? And he literally said that on the stage. He's like, yep, we know this is a weakness, and this is what we're going to be working on going forward. To counter that, I am still questioning him AWPing long term, because some of the stuff he was doing is, it was super explosive. Like, I think he ended. I didn't look at the stats when the tournament ended, but up until their game against Vitality, he had the most opening kills of anybody at the entire event, which was super impressive to be going into that new role and being that explosive with it as well, making so much space. I just wonder what's going to happen when people have seen that, and whether he has that kind of skill, that kind of depth as an AWPer to then counter that, right? When people are having reads and people know his tendencies. I think, possibly because he's such a star player, right, that he will be aware that that's going to happen. It's just a reaction from that. And I don't think we're going to see that, at this next event. I think that's going to be over the course of a few months that people will start to kind of get more of a read on that. But yeah, that was kind of, I was really glad to see that he was coming out and trying just, obviously totally new role, totally new style as well. I don't know, it's just kind of amazing that he's one of the best England leaders in CSGO history. And that's not enough for him. No, he wants to become an AWPer as well now. Like, I think that's just super cool, like, about his character.
I mean,
that's the problem I had though, dude. Is like, I don't know that I believe that that's like a real thing that can, like, here's the problem as well. They also like carefully in the interviews set up the idea that like Lockie himself volunteered, like, oh, maybe I could just not be, because obviously he's just fucking Morty from Rick and Morty as far as I'm concerned. Like, oh gee, I don't know, gla1ve, maybe you could just stop a little bit this time. Like, we're supposed to believe that he said this, right? And then gla1ve was like, oh, I guess I will then, young buck. Like, no, in that scenario, I'll tell you right now, whether this happened or not, it's real, because it's just true. As in spirit, what I'm saying. This just looked to me like gla1ve is such a winner and a gangster that he was like, look, this is the team I have to take to this tournament. Let's not address why I don't have Bobski and why I have Lockie. Like, this is just who I have to play with at this tournament. I want to win this tournament if I can. So logically, what could I do to make it work? Well, at the moment, he's struggling as a primary AWPer. So I'll just do it on a bunch of CT sides and we'll see how it goes. And guess what? As you said, it looked fucking amazing. The problem is that, like, look, I'll put it this way. If he really can just do this for the next events and for month after month, and let's say in 6 months he's still the AWPer, then look, he is just one of the greatest players ever, and he's redefined Counter-Strike and broken the game, blah blah blah. I just feel like this was like a flash in the pan. Like, I don't think even he tries to AWP this much in future tournaments. I think you'll have games where it doesn't work and he goes, right, let's try something else. Like, pragmatically, I can't just do this over and over again, because as I say, like, it would be the most unique like role swap ever in history. Because think about it, one of the things people typically actually criticise Cadian about in Heroic is his individual AWPing isn't that sick, but normally you give him a pass because he's also the IGL and he's doing a good job as the IGL. The idea we're just going to say gla1ve can really do everything. Look, I know he's a pretty sick IGL, but like, he's not fucking superhuman. He's just a human being at the end. So I don't know if because you nailed it there as well. It wasn't just that he was getting AWP kills. He was literally on CT side of Nuke and Mirage, going to the standard AWP spots and just always getting the first kill no matter who he was facing. Like, that just feels impossible to replicate. I know I sound like a hater by saying that, but that's the one element I've got to believe comes down when they play. What do you think, Nohte?
I mean, I'm glad you brought up Cadian, because I actually asked him about gla1ve AWPing. Like, I asked him what his thoughts were on gla1ve AWPing, and he said that just because gla1ve is such a smart individual player, and because he knows what he's doing all the time, like, his decisions are very, he's very firm and final in his decisions, and that's something that you sort of need as an AWPer. Like, you need to be very conscious and very committed to what your choices are and what duels you're taking and whatnot. And that's something that gla1ve has always been very strong on. So essentially what Cadian was saying is that it's for gla1ve to come in and pick up this role, he can be very impactful in it initially because of how he's always played the game and the fact that he's so firm in his decisions. The problem is that once you start playing as an AWPer, a lot of teams will start trying to counter you and read into you, and that's one of the main roles that will get counter-stratted in terms of like where you're playing and positioning. And as smart as gla1ve is with it, the true test will be whether he can even get close to maintaining this level over time, because now a lot of the teams will look at their tapes and their demos and try and counter how he's playing. And also, like, to keep in mind, they had no game tape coming into this.
No,
event,
it's nothing.
Right? So nobody could actually, yeah, exactly. Nobody could actually tell what gla1ve's style would be approaching this. So I think yes, he can play the role. I just don't think he can play at like a top 5 level consistently in terms of being able to keep Astralis and bring them further elevate them over the course of time. And to your point, I think you might have mentioned it on a podcast, or maybe Maui Snake mentioned it, but it doesn't make sense for gla1ve to be in this role when they have Lucky. Like, there's no reason that Lucky should continue to be on the team if they're going to have gla1ve opping.
Oh, of course.
That's not to say that I think Lucky's rifling actually did impress me this tournament. He had far more impact than I thought he would in terms of some of the multi-frag rounds that he had, especially on A-Site Mirage. He was getting a lot of multi-kills and living way longer than I thought he would in a lot of situations. But yeah, I think if there's so many other riflers you could bring in that would have way more impact at a top level, especially in the Danish scene, like the amount of talent depth is incredible. So if they're truly going to have gla1ve opping long term, surely they would be able to find another player to bring up their firepower a little bit, or more experienced even. But yeah, I think I would rather see them find another top opper to fill that spot, because if they want to compete against a team like a Vitality next year, or even actually dethrone Navi, I don't think this specific roster composition will be able to do it, even though they did really impress me this tournament.
I'll go one further. I'll say this, since they themselves are at this IEM winter tournament, so obviously they're also playing immediately another LAN tournament, and it's not a crowd one. First of all, there's going to be no shenanigans. There's no crowd to help them, or I would say more importantly, hurt the opponent. I don't think it necessarily helped them as much. It just felt like it sort of got in the heads of specifically Heroic. It was mainly just that one match that seemed to affect. I would say this, I actually think this is the tournament where they have the correction, because one of the problems I had with Astralis at this tournament was they also were doing way too much of it on CT sides. It reminded me of Nip at the major. And it's like, that just doesn't last. Like, you can do that, by the way, if individually players play well. Obviously, people can just stand at their spot and kill 2 or 3 people when they come to there. But like, realistically, you haven't had any extra time to like rejig your T side. So that's coming in as bad as was before. And now there are demos people can watch. And on top of that, are you really going to have these performances from gla1ve, etc.? The other players I can accept, like, let's be real, like BlameF and Config can do these things again. Config, maybe it was a little bit of his upper reach. Like, that was probably like peak era Config. But even so, he looked very comfortable in the game. It wasn't like he was like strained to do this. He's just a fucking baller, isn't he? So I think they've got, like, what's cool is they've got the firepower. I still think the Lucky thing has to be resolved at some point. The problem with that is it's like every discussion about the Astralis org. There's always a little bit of fuckery shaded in of what the org machinations are. Like, who knows really what their end game is? Is it to flip him in 6 months? Is it that they hope he has a little spike and then they trade him off somewhere? Is he really a player? You can't really know. But if you just look in the server, he does look like he's a little bit out of place right now, especially obviously he's not doing his main role. He's not the main AWPer. So I personally think this is probably the tournament already where they error correct a little bit. But the good news is, as we were talking about before, because they haven't actually had very much time and they're themselves bedding in a new coach, the upside is it doesn't matter if some of the advantages now go down. They can obviously rebuild a whole new system with these new players, figure it out, and they could be way better in a month from now. So I think there's a bit of like, it's like a push and pull. They'll lose a bit now, but they get it back in the future when they've had the few weeks of a boot camp. I'll even address that point you said earlier as well about the fact that like gla1ve himself in an interview essentially was willing to admit, like, tactically, by the way, literally my shit, like that, we're not that good right now. Because here's one thing you'll notice: the really great in-game leaders, part of what makes them great is to actually assess what your issues are and what's going on in the game. You have to be very realistic and pragmatic. You can't just be like some of the players I referred to earlier who want to dream like, oh, I'm just going to give an epic speech and then tell them that, you know, we can all do it and fight to the end and that's what's going to win every game. No, sometimes people like gla1ve and Carrigan, they'll just straight up tell you their troops sort of the expectation, like, look, actually we're not supposed to win this game, we're actually the underdog. You know what, this map they're probably going to pick the favorite. But the idea is you just give people the real, like, the idea is they know you might have a real approach you can take to win the game, but you don't have to blow smoke up their arse and make a fantasy world that you're always the better team. I think it's almost to me a sign of security and how good you actually are as an IGL, that you know that you can sort of tell people, look, we're not at our best right now. You don't have to always pretend you're at a 10 out of a 10, as it were, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and particularly, I mean, maybe aside from Lucky, because I don't know him that well, you know, as a a personality. Just the people that he's surrounded by now, right? Like, I'm sure Config coming into this wasn't expecting that he was going to have the monster numbers that he had, but he's a confident guy, so he's going to try his best, right? And I think maybe that's what gives me a little bit of hope if we do see that gla1ve role switch out, or him not being the AWP anymore, or if we do see people start to counter it. I think the other puzzle pieces that they have going forward do fill me with hope. It's not like gla1ve was, single-handedly carrying that, not at all. So I think even if they do have to have that kind of switch up, the other players behind him, and what you said, Note, about the tactical side of it and how they're already developing that and already sort of trying to innovate, I think that will set them in good stead going forward, even if we do see that being a little bit turbulent in terms of some of the results. I think we are going to see good stuff from them going forward.
I think just one final point on Lucky for me is, to me, this just feels like a lose-lose situation for him, because, as I said, his rifling was actually pretty decent this tournament. And with the player, as you're saying, with the players he's surrounded with, the sort of experience and the amount of help he'll get to improve that over time is actually going to be really beneficial. And his rifling could get exponentially better over time. The issue is that I don't think that they break through like a team like Navi or Vitality next year without a top level opper. Yes. So no matter how good Lucky gets, they will eventually have to, I think, make a change for a top level opper. And that's where it really sucks to be Lucky in this situation, I think.
There's not enough time for him to really level up like people want him to, unless he was going to hit the ground running like some of these amazing rookies. If this is going to take, let's be realistic, a realistic time for it would be like 6 to 9 months. You've got to get a lot of lands, you've got to play with all these teammates a lot. The problem is, I get the vibe, everyone else in the team is like, we either were just winning, or if you're blaming Config, you just joined to win. Like, you're not waiting a year to get your chance. Like, it's like, we want to win today. Like, it's the whole reason we made this team. So I feel like I said, the only reason, in my opinion, the whole Lucky thing exists on the table is because of whatever the org's doing and whatever they want to do with this player. I think if you ask the players tomorrow, like gun to their head or like truth serum moment, they just say, of course, we just want like go get like Farling or something. They would just say, go get someone proven. And because the real weird thing about this team is, as much as you can shade it, like, look, they are winning even with the issues they've had with this player. The problem is, if you replace, like, let's be real, if I could wave a magic wand and tomorrow Device just walks in and takes Lucky's spot, everyone in the whole room gets like 20 times happy and they think they could win the major tomorrow. Like, this team would look amazing then, wouldn't it? There's the difference. There's one thing for someone to be not that bad and for someone to be amazing. The gap between those two is enormous.
Sponge found a really interesting quote that I think we brought up on the first day they were in the arena, of gla1ve literally saying in August, so like 4 or 5 months ago, saying, we're not going to be a top level team, we're not going to be back at number 1 without a top level AWPer. And cut to, he's now AWPing.
Okay,
well, I just thought
that's like the Curb Your Enthusiasm music players after that, like, And then the joke is, it's just him, he's just the AWPer now, and it's like, well, I better do it myself then.
But it's like kind of interesting to see, like, we talk about him being self-aware, and then it's just like, well, obviously, like, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but like, does he really not view Lucky as being that
it's
level?
A bit awkward, right?
Like, how much faith? How much faith do you have in like a player that you still have on your team? You're not switching him out for anybody else to kind of take that role away from him.
Note, as a journalist, look, we have to be cynical at times. We have to know, like, look, this is PR and stuff. Let me ask you this, right? As an outsider, I don't know what like level of connections you have, what info you know about Astralis, so I won't take any of this. All I want to know is this, right? If I asked you, like, as a bet now, you just give me your perspective. Does Lucky in a year from now, is he in Astralis?
I mean, according to Casper, they're not making any changes.
Okay. Yes, indeed. I saw that. I saw that interview. Yes, exactly. Okay, right. Well, that's the official word then, isn't it? So, what's your perspective, though? That's what I want to know.
I think that if they want to compete for the number 1 spot and win majors, then yes, they have to make a change. Right. And I think that if that is their goal, and that is, I don't think gla1ve, Config, gla1ve are going to be satisfied with not trying to do that. So I think, yes, they make a change.
See, I think it's easy. They just build out 4 more players. They make the 10-man lineup, and as long as one of them's a good AWPer, no problem, right? See, what I've done is use their own PR against them there. I haven't really. And by the way, the one story that obviously I understand why people don't mention it, because people just know that at this point in time, for whatever reason Astralis has done it, they're just not going to play Bobski. But the real shame is that's also why it's a lose-lose for Lucky. Note. If this was the only 5-man set of players in Astralis, you'd have no choice but to go, right, either you're not going to AWP, in which case we'll work with you as a rifler, rifler, or you've got to be a good AWPer. His big problem is this. The second he puts that AWP down, and God forbid, by the way, someone like gla1ve actually does a good job with it, then the question becomes, well, why don't we just kick you out for Bobsky? Then he's a really good rifler. So I feel like, yeah, he's in the top worst spot possible. Because I think as an AWPer, you're already in actually arguably the worst spot in the game. You're trying to, as a rookie, AWP on LAN in stadiums at tier 1 against the best teams in the world. Like, that's like the most unfit, like no one would want that task essentially unless you're really the best player. Or in this scenario, again, people are just going to say, why are you here if you're not AWPing though? So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you can't. Don't if you're lucky. I don't really know what way he has out of it aside from just get 3 times better or something.
I think there's only 2 players I've seen who can come in with that sort of pressure on them and perform at the top level, and it's ZywOo and Bit. Those are the only players I've actually seen who've come out of the abyss and just done that straight off the bat without needing multiple years to get into the feel of playing at a top stage level.
Thing is though, dude, they've ruined it for everyone else because now people like Reddit, you just do it like that. No one can! You're aware all the greatest players ever couldn't do that either. What are you talking about? It's the other way around. What you really should ask, literally, it's like what I always used to say this about ZywOo. You shouldn't ask, will Shiro be the next ZywOo? You should say, how the fuck did ZywOo do it? Like, it still doesn't make sense that that player did it, hit the ground and was just the best immediately. So no, I'd say the same thing with the Bit one. Like, he is such an outlier, he shouldn't even be included in discussions about rookies. It's just unfair, isn't it? Like, no one can do that. And also, by the way, it definitely helps when you've got like simple electronic fucking, like he's got pretty banging line. That's another thing. It's not like they just chucked him on fucking Forza and then just sent them to the major. Like, carry the whole thing now on LAN. Like, you know, yeah, he has a bit of help. He has like a pretty good team around him, hasn't he? I know.
He also has like one of the best coaches that could possibly help you develop behind him.
Yes. There's another angle, but I hadn't even thought of that angle. Dude, that's the craziest angle for the Lockie story. I guess for once I'm actually going to be a Lockie apologist, because I'll say this as well. Think how hard this is. Not only are you literally, I think that would on paper have been his second real LAN ever, if you're thinking about like LANs of like teams that we care about. Not only are you at your second LAN, you don't even have the same fucking coaches from the first LAN. You've now changed to a completely new coach, who, by the way, isn't even like a super tenured CSGO coach, so like no one even knows where Ave's system's going to be or what his approach is going to be. So actually, this must have been an incredibly hard set of circumstances for Lockie to be in.
Yeah, I think that just nailed it on his head. I think him coming into this, I even asked him about playing with Dupree and Magis, and he basically said that, yeah, they taught me a lot, but having BlameF and Config come in is like a breath of fresh air. I didn't ask him specifically about the Zonic Ave bit, but I think that's just a good point in the sense that having a coach who does not have the same level, not even close to the same level of experience as Zonic in terms of the top level stage, in CSGO, that is. I think that just sucks for him because every situation I see for him is just a lose-lose, unfortunately.
This video was kindly supported by Lager15, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Zack Schmidt, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Blake Mcginis, Bot Pounder 420, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks, of course, goes out to Jerky's Minion and DZL. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask me a question in one of my video AMAs? Do you want teasers for who the upcoming guests are going to be? Or maybe you'd like to take part in one of those long donated discussions that I do? Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.